Hi, and welcome to The Outside Story. You are listening to our third October Halloween special for the year 2021. My name is Larry, alongside with my brother Jonathan, and today we are coming upon our second week of our October Halloween special. For today's episode, we are talking about two horror films that deal with a topic of death. Our two films are The Vigil, released in 2019 and can be found on Hulu, followed by Ghost Lab, released in 2021 and can be found on Netflix. Death is a common theme in horror films. People die, people grieve, and people experience rather interesting and spooky phenomena when death is involved. The two films we are discussing today talk about death in ways we've seen before, but from a strong cultural perspective that are absent from most modern horror films we see today. Is there anything you want to add, Jonathan?
Not necessarily. I think it's going to get a little bit more clear as we continue to move on. And I feel like death is the episode title of this episode, but that's just one of the many connections that these two films have. But I feel like death is was the more apparent, of all the many themes. But yeah, for sure.
Right, okay. If not, then let's get right to it. The first film we're talking about today is The Vigil. Once again, released in 2019. It is directed by Keith Thomas in his directorial debut, and it stars Dave Davis, who plays a young man. He is a young man this time, correct?
I guess it's not really clear how old he is. He's not young, but he's like maybe mid-20s, late 20s, I would imagine.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. Maybe even more. I don't know. A man.
Yes, a man. A young man. I'm going to go with young
Okay.
man. A young man named Yakov Ronin. Yakov is hired to be a shomer for a person who just recently passed away. And I'm not really too familiar with this process, Jonathan. I don't know if you did research on it, but do you have any information more to add?
Yeah, so a shomer is in the Orthodox Jewish tradition, at least in this film. In the Orthodox Jewish tradition is somebody who watches over a dead body. Like, I think it's typically the first night that the body is there. Like, essentially, it has to happen before the body gets taken to the funeral home to get prepared, like, for the funeral service. And so it's kind of like the first night. And the shomer is sort of responsible to watch over the body or take vigil and sort of like pray and speak psalms over the body in order to sort of shepherd and guide the soul. And so, yeah. I think that's kind of the basis of it.
Yeah, so forgive us because we are not too familiar with this tradition and this perspective, so forgive us for getting anything inaccurate. But yeah, so this film just basically talks about this man's experience as he watches Vigil over the night. And this film literally only takes place in one night, so you kind of get to see and experience the weird, strange things that he encounters during his I guess observation. So Jonathan, I never heard about this film at all, but you said this was on your list for quite some time, and I remember you said you had trouble finding it because this was released in 2019 but just released on Hulu this year in 2021. This film actually did come out in film festivals around 2019, but they had a lot of distribution issues and it took some time for it to finally get released, but they finally released it and it's on Hulu. And Jonathan said, hey, let's watch a scary movie like someday, and then so we did, and we decided to watch this, and I was like, okay, it's on your list, we'll check it out. I wasn't really too sure what I was getting myself into, right? No trailers, none of that. And I sat through it and I was very impressed with this film. Extremely impressed. Like, I was really glad I watched this film.
Yeah.
I was like, this is one of the best horror films I've seen this year, I would say. So
Yeah. For me, it was on my list. I just keep like this sort of short, quote unquote, short list of like films, especially horror films that I want to sit through and watch. And, I don't even remember adding this to my list. Like, I just go through, and whenever a film comes up, somebody recommends it, or I see it on a list or something, and I'm like, oh, that sounds interesting. Like, I'll put it on my list. And, I don't remember the details as to how like a movie ends up on my list, maybe it's a ghost, who knows? But somehow it just somehow ends up on my list, and then I end up just taking the time to watch it. And in this case, I was kind of glad. I don't remember what our other choice was for that night when we were deciding, what to watch,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm really glad we decided to watch this one because I was literally on the edge of my seat the entire film. I was like,
Yeah,
"Oh my
yeah.
gosh, this film is so good!" Like
Mm-hmm.
I could not
Right.
like wait to see how it ended. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And like just in the beginning, like the way that like I'm a pretty big fan of like pretty good openings, and the opening for this, the first two scenes for this film plus the sort of title screen at the very beginning, it just captures you in such a way where you're just like, oh my gosh, like what's gonna happen.
Yeah. So this film, it opens like on a very personal level. The main character, he's in like a group where they just kind of get together and talk maybe like once a week or so. And they talk about like their kind of like what they're going through, what's going on. It's very clear that they're part of a similar community, right? They're part of a Jewish community, a very conservative, rather conservative Jewish community, and they all kind of just share their experiences where they are now, and they can relate to each other on that level. And that's the one thing I actually really love about this film is that I don't know too much about like Jewish culture and and their traditions and how they kind of go about things. And I think this film just kind of gave us a small peek of like what it looks like. And I've never seen this kind of thing on film at all, especially with the lens of horror, because I'm pretty sure if Christianity can have exorcisms and demons and Catholics can have all that stuff too, I'm pretty sure Jewish traditions have something very similar. You know what I mean? And it's
Yeah.
like, but no one talks about that. No
Right.
one wants to bring that up. And The Vigil is actually probably one of the very first few films that there's no real exorcism stuff, but they definitely talk about that stuff about grief, about spirits, about like demons, and all those sorts of
Right.
things that it's like yeah, this is where those kind of religions originated from anyway,
Right.
so of course it'd be there relevant too,
Right.
so
Right. I was going to say, like just to be clear, this group of people at the beginning of the film are people who used to be part of the conservative sort of religion. They're not part of that group anymore. Or at least it's not clear like whether or not they've like turned away from the faith completely, but they were sort of a part of this very conservative, traditional sort of Jewish community, but they're not a part of it anymore. I feel. I don't know if they're like if
mm-hmm.
they don't practice the faith anymore. Period. Like that part's not clear, but it is clear that they had a lot of sort of baggage from being a part of that community. Yeah. And in that
Mm-hmm.
way, it's also kind of similar to Midnight Mass a little bit too, right? Where,
Yeah, a little
where
bit, yeah,
like,
yeah.
they're sort of dealing with this like this baggage that they have from like being so close and so tight knit into that community and with their faith as well. So,
Mm-hmm. Right,
yeah.
right. Yeah, yeah. And as the film kind of went on, it starts to kind of unveil the mystery. We're not going to get too detailed with this, as this I guess for our conversation isn't going to be too in depth. But for sure, absolutely, go check out The Vigil if that's something sounds very interesting. Because to be honest, like I was not really expecting how it was going to end, and I really really loved the whole like I guess character arc transformation and just kind of how it kind of rolls on over towards the end.
Mm-hmm.
And this is like this film reminded me of the Babadook a little
Mm-hmm.
bit, right? It's kind of something where like the character goes through something and whatever it is they're kind of trying to understand or what they're trying to confront kind of manifests, physically and spiritually, and they have to learn how to find a way to get over it. So I'm hoping people like when they watch this film they don't take it too like literally. Like it's kind of supposed to represent that like what he's kind of going through too. And so that's why I definitely would say like definitely The Vigil is probably one of my favorite films, one of my favorite horror films for this year for sure.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree with you on that. That I think The Vigil is probably so far the best horror film that I've seen this year,
Mm-hmm.
and it's also quite scary. You know what I mean? Like it's actually pretty scary. Like I think just the way that the director was able to create tension in
Mm-hmm.
the film. There's some very haunting shots like in this film. Like the very very first shot that I remember that sort of like was kind of like I was like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe this shot is happening right now and I don't know what's going to
Mm-hmm.
happen." Was, like again, like Larry had said, it kind of takes place in this sort of very small, New York style sort of house where like the dining room is connected to the living room, and the character, when he first gets to the house where he's going to watch over the body, he sits down in the dining room, and the shot is from the dining room side shooting into, you can see into the living room, like
Mm-hmm.
behind him, and you can,
Yeah, and he's not even facing the
right,
body.
he's not facing the body, he's like
Yeah.
looking towards the window, and so
Mm-hmm.
um like you can see the body behind him, and so the body's just
Mm-hmm.
like laying in the living room like covered with a white cloth, and the character's like on his phone and he's not even paying attention to the body and stuff like that, and you're just like, oh my
Mm-hmm.
gosh, like what's gonna happen, is the body gonna move, and like what's gonna happen,
Yeah, and I swear it literally stays like that for like five
yeah,
minutes. Like I
right,
swear, like 5 minutes
right.
of the opening.
Yeah,
Heck
and
no.
it's like so scary, And even the first time like he enters into the house, right? Like the first time he
Mm-hmm.
enters into the house, the wife of the person who died is, still in the house too with them. And so she is sitting in the living room when they first get there, and she sees the main character, and she immediately says like, "No, not him. Anyone but him." And so it makes you think like, what the heck, like what's happening, how come she says like he can't be the showmer for tonight, like what is that supposed to mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it sort of like
Right.
props this question to you and like what's going on, and then it sort of creates this tension too, like like does she know something, like does she know
Mm-hmm.
something that we don't, that like he's not going to be good for this job, like what's going to happen? And so the way that the director is able to sort of create that tension all throughout the film is just amazing. Yeah, and it makes it very scary.
And even for me, like the first shot that creeped me out the most, or the first moment, I guess, was when he was leaving his group. Like he's leaving
Oh
with
yeah.
his members from the group, and he was holding his jacket, right? Like his jacket. It was very cold out. It's in New York, right? It's super cold out at night, and he was holding his jacket like he was carrying a body
Over his
over
shoulder. Yeah.
himself. Yeah, over his shoulder.
Uh-huh.
I was like, really? I was like, man, that's so creepy.
Right.
I was like, that whole entire time, I was just like, oh man, that's
Right.
so I can't do
Right, but
it.
it's such good like attention to detail, like
Mm-hmm.
from the director or even from the actor. Maybe the actor made that decision, to do it that way,
Mm-hmm.
but like it's just like, oh man, like that's creepy.
And I guess what I also really liked about it, because to kind of go back to the cultural part, is that when they talk to each other, they'll kind of like speak English, but speak a little Hebrew as well,
Hmm.
and kind of go back and forth, kind of like very kind of like well within our Hmong community, sometimes we'll do that too. Like people of our generation will talk in English, but speak a little bit of Hmong here and there, kind of interject it between the team,
Hmm.
between the two, and that's just kind of like a thing. And so
Right.
I really liked their portrayal of that, and I really liked how they did all these little attention to details, like you
Right.
said. So absolutely check out this film if that sounds really interesting to you. We're not going to say too much more about it. There's a lot more to it, but we kind of
Yeah.
just scratched the surface a little bit of it.
I cannot recommend this film enough. Like for this season of like Halloween, like if you need like a scary fix, like The Vigil will do it for you. Like I promise you. I
Hmm.
promise. I guess the very last thing I would add is just the acting in this film is phenomenal. Like from
Hmm.
the
Definitely.
main actor, I think he's kind of like this is like his first major role, and I thought he just did great in that. And also the actress who plays the old woman, like she is just like amazing. And so
Hmm.
like for me, like one of the big things was this, like the casting, like they were able to find people who
Right.
did such a great job. And it's like a smaller budget film too, because they only have like two, maybe three, different settings at most. And it's just a very small cast. And yeah, it demanded a lot for the main character and the main actor, and I think he delivered.
So our next film is Ghost Lab. It is a Thai horror film that released this year on Netflix. I believe it is a Netflix original film. And forgive my Thai pronunciation. This is going to be terrible, okay? So this film is directed by Pawin Purijitpanya. And he did Phobia. If you're familiar with Phobia or Phobia 2, it's Phobia is like an anthology film series. So like the film has like four different stories, etc. So he directed that. This is his big major, solo film debut. And it stars two actors who are singers. I'm just gonna reference them by their first name. So the first guy, his name is Tana. He plays the character Wee in the film. He's the guy with the glasses. And the second character is Pari, He plays Gla. And so these two are doctors, and they're I don't quite remember how they even get interested in this topic, but so basically these two buddies, they're doctors, and they've been like friends for like pretty much childhood friends, and one day they just get really interested about like
Yeah,
death and like
it was Gla. Gla was the one who was really interested in it. And
hmm
what happened was they were on the night shift one night, and they were
oh,
hanging
that's right.
out by the vending machine and getting food, and they see a ghost in the hospital. They see the ghost
Right,
of
right.
a person who had died, I think, like a couple days ago, and that freaks them out. And then Gla like shows we everything, like all the research that he's been doing to try
hmm
to basically prove that ghosts exist.
Yeah, and so these two go on like on a rather daring experiment to prove this theory, right? Because I guess their goal is to really make it big within the scientific community, and they kind of want to get it into it by using paranormal science, and that's generally like a theme that's not really touched on in like from a scientific perspective, and so that's why I really liked how they approached this film. And so yeah, like one of them, so we and Glad, these two friends, they decided to push their limits. They debate on who becomes like the person who's going to die to fully test this theory. Like from there, it just goes on a crazy spiral, like ride, like absolutely insane. And it kind of just gets to the point where it's like, is this even worth it? Is having all that glory and
Mm-hmm.
having that fame even worth like your sanity and like your family and all these other things.
Right.
Those are some of the questions that this film poses. And we both found about this film because Netflix was just kind of recommending stuff in general. It's like, oh, we think you might like this, and we both saw the trailer. We were like, okay, that sounds really interesting. At first I thought this was a TV show, like a Thai TV show,
Yeah.
but we realized it was a film. We're like, okay, let's go ahead and watch it. And this film, so Thai films Thai films, I still believe are like the king of Asian horror films. Like you absolutely still can't dethrone them. Like you can never dethrone them. Like seriously, I don't think you can dethrone them. And Ghost Lab, I think so. It's really good to see like a recent Thai horror film,
Mm-hmm.
that just came out, and I think this film touches on a lot of like I guess beliefs or legends surrounding like how the paranormal and the ghosts exist, and they literally just start testing out all of these theories, and once they start understanding and proving them, I noticed that a lot of the rules that they've applied here start to kind of branch out to other Asian horror stories as well. Like a lot of the connections and a lot of the things that are related to each other. Like Asian horror stories just generally have the same thing. Like one of the big things is that like why do you see the ghost of someone recently after they die? What prompts them to show up? And those are some of the
Mm-hmm.
questions that Ghost Lab tries to answer, and they've already been answered. It's been answered several times in films, but I think this is the one that tries to take it more literally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think even though Ghost Lab is very interested in the idea of ghosts and where they come from, I think it actually ends up really exploring the idea of the afterlife and what happens after you die. Because we didn't talk about major spoilers yet, have we?
No, we
Okay.
haven't.
Should I feel like we need to go into major spoilers for this particular
Yeah,
point.
it's very hard. It's very hard to touch the surface of this particular film, Ghost Lab, because yeah, I think we need to talk about
Okay,
spoilers for
so
sure.
one of the major things that happens in this film, about I think in the middle of Act Two, Gla, he ends up killing himself and taking his life for the sake of the experiment. And they do this because they again want to prove that ghosts are real. And so they're both like, okay, one of us has to kill themselves in order for us to prove that, ghosts are real, and we can prove that, that we can make them show up. And Blah ends up, killing himself and sort of coming back as a ghost to sort of help we make the point that ghosts are real. And in that, Blah kind of has these moments where like he sort of talks a little bit about like what the afterlife is like after he died, like where did he end up going. And so I
hmm
think the film takes a lot of time in trying to also explore what happens after you die. And it's an interesting take because I think in Thai culture, and I could be wrong, people prove me wrong if this is wrong, but rebirth is a big thing. And so for this film to take the stance that, the afterlife isn't actually rebirth, I think is pretty ballsy, a pretty
Right.
ballsy move to kind of go against the culture and actually present another idea of what the afterlife could be. I think that that's a pretty interesting take.
Yeah, and the film goes on to kind of explore, like towards the second half, like you're not really too sure if he really does see Gla, as a ghost in the afterlife, or if this is something we is trying to overcome, like,
Mm-hmm.
mentally. And I think that's like the most interesting part about this film, because it could go either way. It literally could be interpreted both
Mm-hmm.
ways. And that's what I really love about this film, because it just shows for those two, like, anything is possible, especially when it comes to like, like this topic is about death. And like when it comes to like death, especially for those of like close ones to
Mm-hmm.
us, it's hard to understand like our grieving process. Like, we don't ever really know what it is until we actually experience it, and it's different for depending on the people who we're close with. And for we do know these two were very close friends. They're almost like brothers,
Mm-hmm.
and it goes to show that, how do we even approach this sort of experiment, and in the end, is it even worth it?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so that's what I really like about Ghost Lab. I think it does take a few. I think some parts might be a little too cheesy at times, but I
Mm-hmm.
think that's just how Thai storytelling is
Mm-hmm.
sometimes when it comes to those cues. It might just be the director how he does it. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd say this film is good. I would recommend it if you definitely like Asian. Now, like, there's not too many like jump scares. Like, I will be upfront. There's not too many jump scares.
But
There's only a couple. We watched this with our cousin, and he got like for Jonathan and I, the jump scares didn't get us at all. Not
yeah,
really. Not
but
from
they're
no
scary
real
though.
reaction from us.
Yeah.
They're scary for sure, but no real reaction from us. But we were watching this with our cousin, and he
He
jumped and he
screamed.
reacted.
Yeah.
Yeah, he reacted very well to those jump scares. Uh, yeah, and so I just thought it was funny because, like, we didn't react at all,
Yeah.
but they were scary for sure. They were good, but yeah, we didn't react. But this film is more of a drama with very, very strong horror elements, and I mean very strong horror elements. So don't go in expecting something like, jump scares left and right, like in The Conjuring or what you would see, whatnot. But this one definitely, if you want like a ghost story or a horror story that has a lot more character
Mm-hmm.
and a lot more personal to the characters, then I would definitely recommend Ghost Lab.
Mm-hmm.
What about you, Jonathan?
Yeah, I feel like, I agree with you that there are definitely some cheesy moments, and honestly, I could have done without the very cheesy sound effects and like music and stuff like that, because I feel like it's a little overdone, and it's not trying to be bad. You know what I mean? It's not like Malignant where, it was trying to be bad. Like, this film tries to be good, and it is good for the most part,
Mm-hmm.
but there are just some times where it's just like, oh man, that is so cheesy. Or, I did have a problem with a couple of the smaller actors, and I'm just like, oh man, their acting is not great. But, like the main actors, like all of their acting is phenomenal, from
Oh
the
yeah,
the two main
absolutely.
actors to one of the side characters who plays the girlfriend of Gla, and then also Gla's mom is also very, very good. Like, all those actors
Mm-hmm.
and actresses, very, very well done. But then there's like a couple of side actors who like have like very, very small lines where I'm just like, like that is very, like, I don't know why the director like didn't say something. Like, he should have been
Mm-hmm.
like,
Right.
that's a little too dramatic. Can we just, tone it down a little bit? If at those
Yeah.
times it felt like I was watching one of my mom's like Thai soap operas, and I'm just like, oh
Yeah,
god,
yeah.
this isn't good. But those moments are very, very few and far in between. The majority of the film is still very good. Again, don't love the cheesy sound effects and the cheesy like music, but if you can see past all of those things, I think that Ghost Lab is a very, very good film that asks some interesting questions. And I feel like if you can begin to sort of connect with the two main characters in their sort of struggle to, sort of make a name for themselves and also at the same time like try to find out the truth, then yeah, I think you'll really, really enjoy this film. So I do recommend it, but with a footnote, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So that pretty much does it for this episode of our October Halloween special for 2021. Once again, this episode we talked about The Vigil and Ghost Lab. And next week, we will be continuing our marathon of October Halloween special podcast episodes. And we'll be talking about high school horror. And so the two films, or the two media we'll be talking about. So we'll be talking about The Shed, released in 2019. It can be found on Shudder. And we'll also be talking about the Fear Street trilogy, released by Netflix, released this year. All right, take care, guys.